sort. So I'd just like official to answer that point. Thank you, Chair.
The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Chairman, I know we've got a commitment from the Minister to answer the questions that we had, and I appreciate that offer. I've got one question in relation to the numbers of people who are likely to be affected by this legislation, and whether or not people will be getting reversals of actions they've already taken between 4 September or now. So will they have already paid some tax liability and then be getting a refund? And if so, how is that process going to work? So I just want to get a bit of a feel of how many people we might be talking about, how many organisations we might be talking about, and what sort of process they'll have to go through to get access to the benefits of the legislation. So I'm looking hopefully at the officials who are busy writing some advice for the Minister, who's unfortunately not the Minister responsible for this legislation. He's been detained on very important matters of public business, no doubt, and is unable to join us tonight. The second question that I want to ask is whether any consideration was given during the preparation of this bill to the terrible situation that our early childhood education centres have found themselves in. The Minister of Education has recently announced that the operational grants for our compulsory education schools are going to be maintained at the pre-February 22nd level until the end of the calendar year, and that is an absolute delight for our schools, who are really wondering how they were going to be able to fundraise for the deficit when they've got quite traumatised children who actually need additional support, not less support. But that was a really welcome announcement by the Minister, but nothing at all has been given to early childhood education centres, who are actually in exactly the same position, but even worse, because both their staff as well as their comparable operations grants come from their daily attendance. So they're paid by the number of pupils, the number of students who attend early childhood centres every day. Once you have a few families leaving the suburb or leaving the town, those numbers drop. We don't know quite when people are going to come back, if they are at all. So the insecurity for early childhood centres is also really problematic. So during this package of support for Cantabrians, I wonder if any consideration was given to that, and if not, would the Minister give a commitment to passing it on to the Minister of Education for her consideration at the earliest possible opportunity. The final question I want to ask, Mr Chairman, is one that I'm going to also answer for the Minister, not because I don't think he knows the answer, but because I received a commitment last evening from the Honourable Peter Dunn to answer the question when I asked it, so that we got it on the public record that this was in fact the case in relation to this legislation and the employment subsidy. So the concern I raised with Peter Dunn last night when I read the legislation was whether the tax exemption applies to employment support subsidy. It might sound odd, but actually if it did, it would be very problematic if it wasn't counted as income. And I don't need to go into the details unless the Minister would like me to share it, in which case I'm happy to do that. So I checked with the Minister, would an employment support subsidy be counted as a gift to a Cantabrian and therefore be exempt from income tax? I had my fingers crossed that he'd come back and say no, and I was very pleased when he did. So the employment support subsidy is treated as income. It covers loss of wages and it's subject to PAYE. I am happy with that, but I wanted on the record that that was the advice the Minister gave me, so that there can be no confusion as to the status of that. Mr Chairman, that's all the outstanding questions that I have, and I look forward to the Minister's responses.
Are there any further questions? Speakers?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Tony Roll.
Just to respond to a number of questions that have been answered, there is no firm indication on the number of businesses or people who are likely to benefit from these changes. The amendments come because of a number of concerns that have been raised with the government. And we haven't got any specifics that you can put your exact finger on the number of people who are going to be affected. This legislation, of course, is not unusual in this sort of environment. Members will recall during the Rangatiki floods, there was specific legislation that went through the House by way of leave, which provided some tax flexibility there and around some administrative issues. However, officials advise that the Canterbury earthquakes, which are extraordinary events, more specific responses are required because of the breadth of issues that have been raised to be dealt with, and the bill represents those responses. The depreciation amendments referred to earlier are also part of that responses, and the third responsive issue is the OIC stuff that happened at that time. There are a number of accounting-related questions that were raised, some of which took me back to 101 accounting at Massey University, of which incidentally I got an A+ on that, but it was all downhill from there. The periods of relief, trading stock, anything donated between the 4th of September last year and the 31st of March this year will be covered. Redundancy finishes at the 30th of September 2011. That's all redundancies, not just earthquake related. Working for families, that's going to be at the Commissioner's discretion. Now, the employer welfare contributions, there's no evidence that this was needed for any of the so-called aftershocks, but of the two major earthquakes where there were significant damages to businesses and employees, we are providing for the employer welfare contributions to be 8 weeks after each of the two main events, which makes a lot of sense. The GST questions have been raised. GST is payable by businesses on their sales income, and the goods have been given away, then there is no GST liability, and usual business systems will be involved. The Tax Act requires that trading stock on hand at the end of the year be added back, but that's because trading stock is a deductible when it's purchased, so therefore you have to put it back in over the top line. And these proposals mean that there are no special accounting requirements necessary, and all businesses have trading stock, and therefore all those businesses with trading stock have got to file a return. On the question of compliance cost, clearly the trading stock isn't going to create any issues. Redundancy is pretty straightforward. The working for families discretion, well, that working for families always has some compliance cost, and that will be pretty small. And on the employer welfare proposals, well, logically this will have compliance cost implications because of the detail that's required, but the officials don't think that this is going to be of any great specific burden. And the relief, of course, is voluntary on employers who are suffering these costs, and of course there is therefore a benefit in incurring those costs in order to make a claim.
Members, the question is that parts. We're going to have to do this. Put these parts separately. Oh no, we don't. My apologies. I'm just seeking some advice here. Members, we come to the vote on parts 1 and 2 and clauses 1 and 2, but we have an amendment first in the name of the Honourable Ruth Dyson, and that is to insert C22331B in line 11 after 2010 or 26th of December 2010, and in clause 2241B. The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The noes have it. Members, the question now is that parts 1 and 2 and clauses 1 and 2 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill without amendment.
The House is resumed. Mr Chairman.
Mr Speaker, the committee has considered the Taxation Canterbury Earthquake Measures Bill and reports it without amendment. Mr Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. This bill is set down for third reading forthwith. A point of order, Chris Tremaine.